Welcome to the corner of Graciously Grieving, where you can find hope for tomorrow. Today we will be discussing unaddressed grief. I'm the host, Ricky Cunningham, and today we have with me the proud pastor of Bethel Missionary Baptist Church
Glad to be
of
here.
Longview, Texas. I am so glad to have you. What I want to do is give a little bit of background about how he got here to Bethel back in 2019. We had suffered a loss. Uh, Reverend Houston, who was the pastor for almost 10 years, passed away. And that was a trying time for the congregation. It's what would be considered as a collective grief. And what should have brought the congregation together, it separated us. There was a bunch of anger and hurt, and it was a bunch of mixed emotions, but we did not work through that grief very well. So as we went through the process of finding a pastor, we found you. God sent you to us. And I just want to know, when you got here, did you understand the magnitude of the grief that was within the congregation?
Great question. First of all, thank you for allowing me to be sitting with you in order to answer these questions. But to answer that question there, I did not realize the magnitude of coming in as a new pastor, new area for me, coming from Tyler, but coming to the city of Longview, and new people, new faces, new attitudes, and on top of that, dealing with grief that I was not aware of at that present time.
Because, most of the time when African Americans suffer with grief, they go to the church for help.
Right.
But in this instance, that's where the initial problem happened. So it was hard for us too. And so you walking into that, I know that had to be difficult. How did you move forward from that?
And that's another good question. Like you first stated, a lot of times we look for that help or that grief from the pastor, from the leadership, from the church overall. But me coming into a new church that was dealing with grief, it takes time. That's the number one thing. I think sometimes we try to put a time limit or a time frame on grief and what we want to, how we want to fix the grief or how we want to deal with it. But the first thing that I had to realize is, first of all, is I had to realize and to confront that, hey, it's not really hatred towards you, Pastor. This is just a grieving congregation that is grieving. So once I realized that, then I had to step back and give people time, give the coverage time, give the people of God time in order to grieve over the previous pastor. Did it hurt me in during that time? Absolutely, because I felt as if the grief was more toward me. But what I come to realize is that they're grieving. So I took on to the same grieving as them.
Right.
Us being warned while they was grieving, I had to learn to grieve with them as their leader, in spite of me not knowing him personally. But I knew I had to take on the grief of the people in order for us to be able to move forward.
Right, right. Grief is a complex emotion that needs to be processed. Um, when grief is not addressed, it will linger. And as you just said, we can take on those emotions. But in our case, within the congregation, it went from pain, shock, and sadness to anger, fear, and bitterness, which leads to division. And that hurt and division led to separation. How did you address that grief that was in the congregation that led to some divisions and some opposition to your leadership?
Honestly, that was the hardest thing to deal with. It wasn't so much of the grief, but it was what the grief was causing.
Yeah.
Allow me to say that. And people feel as if grief is just, hey, I cry and it's over. But grief causes so many other mental aspects, depression, like you said, separation. So coming within a body of Christ where you're seeing grief and what's causing this separation, first of all, you have to address what it is.
Mm-hmm.
It's not so much of people against one another, but it's the spirit. If you allow me to say it, grief is a spirit.
Mm-hmm.
And once that spirit is so heavy on you,
Yes.
it's hard to discern what is really going on. So me as a leader had to first of all realize what this spirit was.
Mm-hmm.
Was it really just hatred or was it really just separation? But when we got to the head of it and realized it was grief, I had to allow for that spirit, pray over that spirit of grief to be able to resonate or to be able to separate from the church so that we could finally see the growth within us
Mm-hmm.
and to move past those things. But again, that goes back to what I said earlier. It takes time.
Yeah.
You know, I just didn't pray on it Sunday. Then Monday, I reaped off it and prayed. No, it took time. So I had to play both sides of the fence. I had to allow for the grief to happen.
Yeah.
But I also had to allow for the separation, for the things that goes along with the grief to happen so that we can move past those things.
Mm-hmm.
And I think what happens in losses, I think what happens in grief is that we realize it, but we wanted it to stop instead of letting it take its course.
Mm-hmm. It has to flow. After, because last year was a rough year for us, but we made it through. I had wrote down after we had a meeting one Tuesday evening, I said the process will yield progress. There are growing pains in a church. It is a season of pruning to remove what is quenching the spirit from flowing and binding the members of the body of Christ. Like you said, it is a, because grief, it's lingering. In my podcast, I say it's even sneaky because it'll creep in and you won't even realize it, and it will take over so much so that you won't even recognize who you are. Absolutely. And how did I get here, because the pain is just taking over so much so.
And let me piggyback that. The thing is about grief, even though it's sneaky and we realize it when it comes upon us, we can't run from it.
No.
We have to face grief. We have to deal with what comes along with grief. Because if we run from it,
Mm-hmm.
then it's like me as the pastor now. If I would have left in the first year, have I helped this church to heal? Have I did anything where God has sent me to help these people of God to get through this grieving state, to deal with these things, or to whatever the case was? And that's something that we have to realize with them.
Okay. Division often can be because of feelings of guilt or feelings as though someone is a traitor. Grief can really distort the reality of a situation, especially when communication is not happening from what we're diverting from what really is the problem. And like you said, and that was the grief. We were so oblivious to that we had not grieved from losing him because we went directly into, okay, we have to first have his funeral, then we have to look for another pastor. We never really stopped to say, okay, oh my gosh, he's gone. Let's grieve for that. Of course, we did what we were supposed to do. We covered up the chair and did the honorary thing about that. But we did the steps, but we did not do the actual work that comes into it. Okay, Pastor Owens, I want to ask you this last question before we close out. How are things now with the congregation, and what is your vision for the future?
Great question. Coming up on year 5, now that I have been here, God has allowed for us to continue to move forward. Your question of how and what is my vision for moving forward, let's not forget about this grief. Mm-hmm. Number one, this grief have taught us a lot of things. It has taught us how grief can help and hurt the church. Moving forward, thanks to you, we will implement for us dealing with grief. I believe that the church itself, not just Bethel, but the church itself, have failed the aftermath of dealing with the loss. Mm-hmm. Let's be honest, a lot of churches, we're always there that Saturday at 11 o'clock for that service. Yeah. But what happens in months to come after we have taken that loss, after we have dealt with that grief, or after we have talked about those many things. I want to implement here at the Bethel Baptist Church of how do we deal with grief after the fact, because listen, there's no time limit on dealing with grief. So I want to be able to help these members and outside people that come in 3 months after losing mom, losing dad, or losing that child, or whatever the case is, to help them deal with this grief, because we have learned firsthand what grief can do. So as a church, for us outreach, we must be able to reach those people in that grief area, in that loss area, to be able to help them to coincide with that.
Yes, thank you. And before we close out, I just want to say this from a book that I've been reading. It's called Unattended Sorrow by Stephen Levine. And in it, he says, healing is entering with mercy and awareness into those areas of ourselves we have withdrawn from with fear and a sense of helplessness. Healing is reoccupying those parts of ourselves that we have abandoned because of mental or physical pain. Healing is replacing our merciless reactions with a merciful response.
Wow. Wow.
We have to be kinder to ourselves and be more patient with ourselves when we're grieving. There's, as Pastor has said, there's no time limit on it. Be kind to each other as well. I want to thank Reverend Owens for joining me today, and you as well. Please follow me on Facebook at Graciously Grieving, Living Through the Pain, and hit the subscribe button down here. Until next time, see you here at the same gracious channel at the same gracious time. God bless. And it made me think of you. And then when you talked about what God told you how to fight on confirmation, that you're supposed to keep on fighting on for us. And this is what you're doing for us. You're bridging the gap of brokenness to heal hearts by providing hope to live graciously. That's what you
want. Say that on the camera.
Oh, no. Because I just... You told me I wasn't lying.